Venezuela is hell. Death, hunger, sickness, and violence are galloping across the entire land. There are no prospects and no safety. Many are still hopeful for a change, but I don't see it happening anytime soon because of the level of entrenchment of the regime against an ineffectual opposition. Additionally, most people don't even care to understand why we reached this sorry state. Do you really think the creative, intelligent Venezuelans should remain here to waste their lives? That's from Jake.
Hey, Jake, how's it going?
Hi, Steph. Hi to everyone listening and watching.
Yeah, welcome to the show. I'm sorry about the topic. What's happening for you at the moment?
Well, the latest in the news is that a bunch of news portals were blocked by every single ISP in the country because they were critical to the government. Funny thing, though, they were blocked by private operators before they were blocked by the state-owned ones. That is very suspect. In any case, that's just the most recent bit of news that I have right now. There's always, if you turn to the back of the newspaper, you're always going to find a bunch of news about murders and deaths and thefts and awful things.
And is it relatively safe where you are?
Define relative. Define safe. Define where I am.
I'll let you do those.
All right,
because
fine.
You're closer to the ground than I am.
Okay, it is relatively safe in the sense that I'm not expecting anyone to just burst into my house and shoot up the place. But that is a possibility. It's not something that's out of the ordinary. There are cases where people have gotten into relatively secluded. I live in a relatively secluded neighborhood, so there are cases where people have gone into relatively secluded neighborhoods and just invaded a house, a home invasion. And home invasions here. See, here's the problem: there are home invasions in the United States as well, but usually people survive those because there are pretty stringent laws for things like murder. Here, the laws are written, but there isn't so much interest in having them enforced. So people die.
Right. There was, I had some messages from people from Venezuela. One person wrote, "This is the first video of Stefan's that I will not be able to finish. Got to 31 minutes before getting too depressed. I'm Venezuelan born," he said, "and have most of my family over there still. My mother, who is here in the US, speaks with my grandma, who is in Venezuela, every day. And the only reason why they are barely surviving is because two of my cousins who work in the airport get a small box of food every week. Sending anything over in the mail from the US is futile, as it will get stolen or not even delivered. My two cousins had to move in with my grandma because their mothers do not have jobs and can't maintain them. So they decided to unite and work together to survive and also keep grandma alive. I can attest everything said by this guest is exactly spot on. Never has it been this bad. People that lived in the early 1900s Venezuela had it better. Let that sink in.
That is correct.
The chances of you getting killed for your possessions is just as high for the chances of you or your family members getting kidnapped and held for ransom. My mom's best friend, who is in the middle class, has 8 cameras around their property, a shotgun at the ready whilst watching the camera screens from the inside of the house constantly. The family members swap shifts to do this. They have a very high wall around their property, and every morning they rush into the car and out of their steel gate as fast as possible, lest they get caught by looters who constantly try to cause them harm. I tell you all this not to pity me, my family, or Venezuela, but to give you a perspective on life that you have no idea how it feels like. You think you have it bad? Think again. Now look on your country and learn from current history." That was one comment. And the other one,
Wow,
which really struck me, was with regards to Venezuela, went like this. "When you try to set up a socialist state, but your retarded system fails, but that's okay because it wasn't real socialism. So you try again and your retarded system fails, but that's okay because it wasn't real socialism. So you try again and your retarded system fails, but that's okay because it wasn't real socialism. So you try again and your retarded system fails, but that's okay because it wasn't real socialism. So you try again and your retarded system fails, but that's okay because it wasn't real socialism. So you try again and your retarded system fails, but that's okay because it wasn't real socialism. And this goes on for a couple of pages.
Yes.
And that is basically human history in a nutshell.
Yes.
So, yeah,
Well,
I am. Sorry, go ahead.
No. That's exactly what it is. One of the greatest concerns that I see in people who are in the same position as I am, where they can see what is going on in the United States and in Canada and in Europe, is that there is this refusal to acknowledge that the system that the system they're fighting for, like socialism, or that they won't call it communism because communism failed, and socialism isn't that. But the system that they're fighting for, which is going to free everyone and end all oppression and redress the evils created by capitalism, this system has been implemented throughout history many, many times. And there's a Venezuela is proof, is living proof, is current living proof that the system, even at its best, even when it's tried with the best of intentions, has a tendency to devolve into the most horrific experience, in the most horrific kind of it devolves into violence and suffering and hunger and death, and it's just there's no stopping it. It's because of the very nature of the system. When you give one person the capacity to make decisions over the economic comings and goings of an entire nation, how do you expect that person not to be corrupted? And let's say he is super virtuous. How do you expect the super virtuous man to be able to handle the complexity that is presupposed in the economic activity or in the market of an entire nation? Even if I don't know, you pick 100 people. Those 100 people are not going to be able to make decisions for 1 million, 2 million people. It's impossible. One can barely keep up with the economic decisions of one's own household or with personal economic decisions. How do you expect somebody to be able to handle millions and millions of transactions and determine what is the best price of whatever? I mean, without any knowledge, without any experience, without any, any group of government bureaucrats, however big and prepared it is, cannot have the experience of being in all economic sectors, in all types of businesses. They can't. It's impossible.
Yeah, it's not due to a lack of willpower or a lack of virtue. You are asking the completely and totally impossible when you want a socialist economy. Mm-hmm. When you want a centrally planned, government-controlled economy where government sets prices, where government has nationalized industries, where government sets wages, where government sets working conditions, where government supposedly negotiates on behalf of everyone and sets licenses and all of this central control, all of this central planning, it is not because people lack virtue. It is not because people lack good intentions. It is not because they lack information. It is impossible with no price mechanism, with no supply and demand. It is absolutely, completely, and totally impossible to get any kind of efficiency going on.
That's correct.
So it's sort of like, think of a soccer game. And one team, Team C, Team Capitalist, they train and they train and they train. And then they go out and they play. Right? And they've practiced the passing, they've practiced the moves, they know, they go out and they play. Now, on the other team, Team S, Team Socialism, what they do is they don't really train. But what happens is there's a coach on the sidelines who's screaming at them the plays they should make while they're trying to play. Now, clearly, Team S is going to lose every single time because that's a centrally planned team where everybody just sits around or runs around or whatever it is and waits. And the guy says, not just which play, he doesn't just call out the plays like a football coach or something, but what he says like there are 11 players a side in soccer. So he says, player 1, I want you to run 20 feet ahead. Now, player 2, I want you to run 30 feet to the left. Now, player 3, I want you to run 50 feet ahead and then take a sharp left. Right? I mean, it's completely, while he's calling out the plays, Team C has scored 3 times. Right? If you have a passive group of people being centrally organized and planned, it won't work in sports. It won't work in an army. If everyone just stands there and waits for the central planner to tell them what to do, it doesn't work in an economy. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And the fact that people have been trying this for thousands of years. This is not a new concept. There's a line in Shakespeare's King Lear where one of the characters says that his goal, his ideal of the socially just system, is, he said, that distribution should undo excess and each man have enough. That distribution should undo excess and each man have enough, right? We take from this person, we give to this person. We take from the rich, we give to the poor. All that happens is everyone ends up poor, and you end up back to Stone Age levels of self-sufficiency, which is where, tragically, Venezuela is heading. And as to why people believe this stuff, I will let you take a swing at it, because there's no evidence whatsoever. The theory, the practice of oligarchical collectivism, as is in 1984, it doesn't work. It never has worked. It never will work. The examples of it not working, and not working catastrophically. Like, it's one thing to put a key in your car and turn it, and it doesn't start, right? Oh, my car's not working. It's quite another thing to have it freaking blow up in your face. That's a very, very large amount of not working. So why do you think people keep getting drawn back into the same old stupid self-destructive bullshit?
Because it's tempting. Because it's tempting.
But yes, that's a tautology. Why do they do it? Because they want to do it. That doesn't add anything. Well, but why is it tempting?
Here's the thing. I think I know why this is. I'm not sure. I could be proven wrong. But when people first leave their household, when people first start trying to work in the free market, everything to them, they're new. They have nothing to, well, they have relatively little to offer. So every opportunity of exchange seems like it seems to them like other people are putting upon them that they have to give something back. They feel aggressed. So there's a bunch of people who have not withstood, who have not powered through that initial phase, and they've placed free trade in a spectrum, in the same spectrum as aggression. So if free trade is in the same spectrum as aggression, well, then it would only be consistent to try to control free trade in order to prevent it becoming aggression, because it's in the same spectrum. So they feel, since they couldn't cut it, or since they know other people who can't cut it, or since they know, and there are many people who are not going to cut it for a long time, but eventually one's going to grow out of that. At least that's what I think. Because everyone, it is my contention that everyone has something of value to offer, and if they don't, they can develop it. Everyone. And I think that's a nicer view of the universe, by the way. In any case, they feel like since it's the same spectrum as aggression, that it has to be controlled, and the only people who should control aggression is, the government. The state was created. You read Hobbes' Leviathan, you see that it was created exactly for that purpose. So they try to protect other people or themselves sometimes by having the government intervene on their behalf against the folks that they perceive to be the big guy, when in fact they ignore completely. The big guy is the government, and the little guy is the business owner who is, or the enterprise who's trying to deal with them, even though they are much tinier than the enterprise. But the big guy is the government. They completely ignore how much bigger, and they don't realize that aggression and free trade, it's not a spectrum, it's a toggle. Free trade is free trade until somebody flashes a gun, or somebody lies, or somebody tries to do something without the knowledge of the other person, like hide something from the other person. At that point, it becomes aggression, but it's not a spectrum, it's a toggle. That's one possibility that I've always considered. I guess the other thing is when you flash the possibility you're to millions of people, and you say, well, look, just give us the power and we'll create conditions that are, more appealing to you, more beneficial to you. People sign up. People sign up because they externalize. People externalize, which is another childish impulse, by the way. People externalize, and they think, well, the fault must lie outside of me. I'm not doing well. All I have to do is just give power to the people who are going to change the things that are making me fail, and they will fix my life for me. Inevitably, it never happens. So the person who comes along who offers more of that, they go along with that person, and so on and so forth until small, government controls devolve into full-fledged socialism, and then that devolves into, what we have. That's another possibility.
Right. Go on.
Oh well, no. I guess it is sad that there are so many people who have not developed a level of maturity that is necessary in order to make political choices, and that is one of the reasons why I think we are seeing so much. I mean, we're seeing the popularity of these movements just continue to hold, at the very least, in spite of the evidence. I think it's immaturity on the part of the people who offer it, and the people who want it, and the people who vote for it. I think, and the worst part is, in the end, it all just it turns out much worse. I mean, they say that capitalism is it contaminates the environment, pollutes the environment. Well, you look at Russia, after the Iron Curtain fell, and see all the towns, complete towns that were deserted. Something like 20% or 15%. I don't know, 15 or 20% of the territory in Russia. Now, I'm sure that includes Chernobyl, but of the territory in Russia was polluted beyond recovery. It's still not recovered. It's supposedly it helps people. Socialism is going to help people be able to afford better housing, more food. And you look at Venezuela and you see people making long, huge, 8-9 hour long lines in front of supermarkets or government markets from 3 or 2 in the morning until the next afternoon to buy like a tiny amount, like a bag of rice and some plantains. And everything is much more expensive. There are products that are. Oh, that is another thing. It's so sneaky. There are 2 exchange rates in Venezuela. One of the exchange rates is the official exchange rate, which is something like $10, 10 bolivars per dollar. The other, there are not 2, there are 5 actually, but I'm just going to focus on these 2. So everything that is basic needs is supposedly made at that rate. Like if you're an importer of food, you have a right to buy dollars at that rate, so you can import food and then sell it for less. So you buy, I don't know, something costs $1. You use 10 bolivars to buy it, and then you sell it for $1.50. So you charge 15 bolivars. Okay, that's the official exchange rate. There are a bunch of other exchange rates, and then there's a black market rate. Now the problem is when you're actually going to buy dollars for whatever need you might have, and there's a bunch of stuff that you can't find in the country that you have to buy outside of the country in Colombia, or have someone bring it to you who's traveling from somewhere. When you go there, you have to go at the black market rate because official dollars are difficult, if not impossible to find. Like you have to be really, really chummy with government folks in order to buy at that rate. So that one is at almost 4,000 bolivars per dollar. So that's 400 times the amount. So what the government does is, at 10 bolivars per dollar, I mean, if you calculate the minimum wage, it's something like $3,000 a month. It's one of the highest, if not the highest, in the entire continent. But these poor people, they can't always find food. There isn't enough food at the government rate. Most of the food is imported by people who have no access to these special dollars. They have to buy at black market rates. So when they go buy food, they have to buy 400 times the price. So the actual minimum wage is 400 times less than what the government reports. Was that clear?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
What else? I mean, to me, it's, I don't think one of the main contentions for which I wrote to you was that having people remain here, and people just won't acknowledge it here. And that's one of the things that makes me the angriest. You say, well, that's socialism for you. And they're like, no, this isn't socialism. It's just that these people perverted that. Come on, no. We need a system of free trade. And they're like, yeah, but free trade is bad. Why? Nobody knows. You say, oh, because people exploit other people. Oh, thank you. That's not happening now, isn't it? So I see people here, and it's very difficult. Nobody reads. Nobody reads. Yeah, nobody reads. The worst thing you can do is open a bookstore here, because you're definitely going to fail. I've seen a bunch of bookstores close in the last 15 to 20 years. They just disappeared. Only the big ones remain, but I have a theory that's because they also sell board games. Nobody knows anything about when this has been tried and when it has failed before. You talk about Russia, you talk about Poland, you talk about Croatia, you talk about all the countries in the communist bloc, you talk about China and how they are communist in name only. Nobody knows anything about that at all. Nobody reads political philosophy. They don't know why it's important for powers to not be concentrated in one person. They don't know why the president should not be able to tell the Supreme Court what to do, or why the president should not be able to tell Congress what to do, or why it's illegal for the Supreme Court to annul acts of Congress just because the president said they should. And what everyone does know is that something has to change. That's one of the things you hear most often. And the other thing that you hear very often is we need to improve the way we see the world. Like we need to change our mentality, but there is no alternative offered to what that change has to be. And there is no real definition of mentality. I mean, people have to realize that they have to take responsibility for their own lives. You hear that. That is good. That is one of the things that you hear that I like hearing. But then you talk to that politician who said, and you say, okay, fair enough. So that means that as soon as you're in power, I expect all the government programs are just going to be gradually divested from. He says, well, no, people need food, people need housing, people need all these things. They're like, oh my, okay, so if I take your political party and I make a dent, like a cut, it's the same color as the one that's in power. Inside, it's just as red. So people leave. Prepared people who are intelligent and who have the means and people who have something to offer, they leave because there's nothing to do here, Stefan. It's a desert. It's a desert. There are very few people who have found a way to make it work. Most professionals have left. They've left and they've gone to Spain, Australia, United States, Canada, Brazil, which is doing very, very well, although no one will admit to it. And and they just there is no. I did hear you once say something about war-torn countries in the Middle East. It was in that context you said that intelligent people should remain in order to fix the countries once the crisis was past. But I think it's inevitable to stop intelligent people from leaving, because it's the prisoners. It's game theory. It's the prisoner's dilemma. If everybody stays, everything is fine. But if the person next to you leaves and you stay, you're screwed. So you have a choice. Do you want to leave or do you want to stay? It's not going to be as fun leaving and sacrificing your home, your entire nation, but it's preferable to staying here and having everyone else leave, and then you end up in the gutter. Literally. Like I've seen people dead in a gutter on my way to university, like on the street lying dead. Because it was early in the morning, because it was 6 a.m. and I was going to university early, and I just passed a person by, and there he was, just lying there on top of a puddle of congealed blood. That's what you see in the street. You also see shootouts. I was also trapped in a shootout in the freeway once. That's not normal stuff.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know anyone who's still around who's smart?
Yeah, there are plenty of people. Although not as many as before, but there are a few smart cookies left around here. Yeah.
Okay.
But very few, Stefan, and they don't like to get involved in politics because that's dangerous.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I'm going to tell you a couple of my thoughts about it and see if it makes any sense.
All right.
Get comfy. I'll tell you when I'm done.
Sure. Go ahead.
So Venezuela has been clocked as an average IQ of 84 in the population. Now, this is in the past when there were more smart people around, so it may have slid down from there, down below that number. It may be in the low 80s. It may be lower than that. I mean, if I had to guess, it would probably be low 80s. I mean, and that's bad because there's IQ and there's like mental age, right? Like how old are you emotionally, or how old are you in terms of compared to people with an average intelligence of 100 or whatever. And I don't know the answer to that with regards to sort of low 80s, but I'm going to guess between 12 and 14 years old. So as far as sort of mental development goes, significant portions of Venezuela are stuck at 12 to 14 years of age. Now, do you think you can run a sophisticated modern economy and a republic and a constitutionally limited democracy with people with the mental age of 12 to 14-year-olds? Of course not. Of course not. And this is why Dr. Helmut Nyborg, who's been on the show, says when IQ dips below 80, you don't have a democracy. I'm sorry, below 90, you don't have a democracy anymore. Now, the great tragedy about all of this, and there are so many great tragedies about this, but the great tragedy about all of this is that when socialism takes hold of a country, and it is a form of totalitarianism. Socialism has a much nicer sound to it than totalitarianism, but it is a form of totalitarianism. What happens is the smart people leave. They can see which way the wind is blowing and that a black blood-soaked wind is coming in from the sea of collectivism. And they leave. And then what happens is you start running into significant problems like who's left to teach your children? Well, the smart people have gone, so you have less intelligent people teaching your children. Who's left to grow the food and distribute the food? Well, the smarter people have gone, so you've got to rely on less intelligent people to grow and to ship the food from place to place. Now, smart people know that corruption doesn't pay in the long run. You might get a little bit in the here and now, but you also have smart people in the police force and smart people in the judiciary and smart people in the jury pool. So you might get caught and you might get prosecuted. But basically, you know that if the country becomes corrupt, everything's going to turn to shit. So people of like average intelligence and above, in general, don't get that much involved in corruption that way. Because once you get a bunch of idiots running the country and once you get a bunch of idiots in charge of the food distribution system, as this guy's pointing out, stuff just gets stolen. And then you start to get an escalating problem because a bunch of people start stealing stuff and then you start running out of food. And then you don't have enough food for your kids, which could cause developmental delays, could cause a lack of, all of that good mother's milk and good nutrition and stimulating environment and so on that seems to have something to do with helping with IQ. People also get short-tempered, they get angry, they get abusive maybe with their kids, they hit them more, which also shaves down your IQ. You see this kind of death spiral, right? As people start stealing from the common good, which is always happens in socialism, always 100% guaranteed, always going to be the way. People start stealing in a socialist environment, which creates shortages. Now, once you get shortages, more people start stealing. It becomes desperate. Because it's one thing to steal to get more. It's another thing to steal because you don't have enough. So more and more people start stealing. As more and more people start stealing, fewer and fewer people end up producing. So there's less to go around, which means more people steal, which means fewer people produce, which means there's less to go around. Ah! So corruption goes from a moral choice to almost a physical necessity. If I want to eat, I have to take what's in front of me, because if I don't, the next guy will. He'll eat, I won't. And that's the end of the story. Now, if you have a mental age of 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, socialism seems more correct because it's like the family. The family runs on socialist principles in that from each according to their ability to each according to their need, right? I can make the money, my daughter can't, so right, I pay for her. So that all makes perfect sense when you're in a family. Now, it's not socialist because it's not coercive, but nonetheless, that is the reality. So if you have a population that remains somewhat childlike, even when they reach their full maturity, then socialism is just going to make sense to them as a whole, right? Now, the other thing too, which is why I keep circling back to this IQ issue, is that I have no doubt at the moment that there are environmental factors significantly depressing IQ in the Venezuelan population. And that's horrible and that's tragic. But even if everything was perfect, which it was, more or less, right? I mean, in terms of where it was 300 years ago, Venezuela, up until a couple of decades ago, was doing relatively well. And the problem with that aspect of things is that when you have a lower IQ population, in other words, even if things were ideal in terms of development and in terms of nutrition and so on, 60 to 80% of IQ appears to be hereditary. The later on you go in life, the more hereditary it appears to be. And if there are genetic limitations on IQ, as there seem to be for the Venezuelan population and for other populations around the world, they can't do as well as Japan. Sorry. Can't do as well as China, can't do as well as Western Europe because of you're more than a standard deviation down from Western Europe at 84, and you're more than a standard deviation down from Japan, and you're more than two standard deviations down from Ashkenazi Jews, particularly in the language realm, 115. So you're just not going to be able to do as well. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you just can't do as well as people around you. Has that ever happened to you in your life?
Not really.
Lucky man. That's yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, it has happened, but because I have a severe eyesight deficiency. So there are things that, like, I'm not a sharpshooter, and I don't think I ever will be an excellent sharpshooter because I can't see very well. But when it comes to, in terms of labor or even up to a point, even physical ability, I've been able to fend for myself really well. And I always end up picking it up. I've been tested.
Well, that's good. And I'm sorry to hear about your eyesight. You're a very lucky person as far as that goes. I mean, the number of things where I have felt deficient in my life, I couldn't even list them all, just sort of off the top of my head. Math was a struggle for me. Now, that was partly because math is one of the things where you need to do homework, and homework for math requires concentration. Now, my house was so chaotic and so violent and so brutal, I could not concentrate at home. On the other hand, reading was, particularly reading fiction, was escapism for me from the brutalities of home life. So for me, language, I was always way ahead in language. Like when I was in grade 8, in other words, when I was 12 or 13, I was moved up 5 years and put in a grade 13 or for 18-year-olds writing class. So I was like 12 or 13, and I was like in an 18-year-old class for writers, and always got lots of positive feedback. My essays would be read out to class, and this even happened in college and university as well. So writing, no problem. Oral communications, no problem, because, being away from home a lot, you end up chatting a lot with friends, right? If you're home a lot of times you're sitting staring at computers, or you're staring at video games, or you're staring at the TV or whatever, or maybe you're reading alone. But when you're out with friends, you're negotiating all the time, and none of us really had homes we liked to be in, so we were always roaming around and negotiating and chatting, which is why, and debating, right? I mean, I remember an hour and a half, I think it was, something like that. We were sitting out back of the Don Mills Mall, now defunct, I think, trying to come up with a name for our bike gang. All negotiating and thinking and planning. Same thing happened with Dungeons and Dragons, which is a giant storytelling with gambling elements. But anyway, so for me, the things that I was bad at, I'm also bad at memorization. I mean, it's funny because I have, one of the biggest shows we did last year was The Fall of Rome, which was a great production, and I'm very, very pleased with it. And yeah, I took a course in Roman history in college. Giant 2001 Space Odyssey sucking sound, because it was all about, well, memorize this and memorize that. And this emperor was followed by this emperor, and this with the years. And I'm not great at that. I can sort of jam stuff into my head, but facts and dates and places, not for me. And it's funny because when I played a Shakespearean lead, I could memorize it with very little difficulty, right? I mean, so as far as poetry goes, but dates and places, it's not my wheelhouse. It's not my bag. And science, I was okay. It's a lot of memorization in science. So that was like scientific method, theory, the philosophical aspects. I'm down with that. But I don't have any particular skill sets in a wide variety of things. Now, computers, I got it really well and understood it really well. And yeah, I remember having to rewrite essays in science and so on. And I remember there was this woman, a nice girl. She played cello, and I remember the teacher gave me, read this girl's essay and on plant development or whatever it is, and try and do something like that. And, so with me, I have very good strengths and very deep weaknesses when it comes to sort of intellectual ability. When it came to music, I like to sing, and I have a sort of amateur Broadway kind of voice, but the real singers, I just couldn't keep up with them. And of course, I liked, like most people did, the Peter Gabriels, the Stings, the Phil Collins, more the tenors, and I'm more of a baritone. So I wasn't really great at that. And when it came to acting, I was okay. For me, it's much better to have my own words than it is for me to fill myself with usually words I find distasteful from other people and then spew them out as if they're authentic to me. Maybe I'm not hollow enough, or maybe just lack that particular talent to go all the way. But when I was in theater school, I was far from the best actor in the class. And, in theater school, there was also the singing contest and all of that. So there were challenges. As dancing, I liked to danced a lot when I was younger. As far as learning dance steps and so on, not my wheelhouse at all. I sort of go on and on. But there's stuff, I always knew I was going to be great at something. I knew beyond the shadow of doubt I was going to be great at something in my life. And I tried many things: acting, writing, entrepreneur, playwriting, poetry, and all that kind of stuff. Now this is my thing, baby. This is my bag. Papa's got a brand new bag. And this is what I'm born to do, what I'm supposed to be doing, what I'm all about, what I'll never get tired of. And the reason I'm saying all of this is that I think most people think that they're going to end up being good at something. But the problem is, if you have an IQ of 84, you're not going to be good at anything, fundamentally. I mean, you'll be okay at some stuff, few things, or you learn some basic skills, and you might be fine in a sort of low to middle rent job or whatever, but you're just not going to be great at anything. Now, that's a real blow to the tribe. One of the great challenges of multiculturalism is you run into tribes where, on average, they make you look sucky. It's just the way it is. I mean, people go nuts about this with Jewish influences here and there. Well, Jews are really, really good, particularly at language-based stuff and creative stuff and comedy and so on. So, go compete. But the reality is that it's going to be a challenge. Same thing with blacks and certain kinds of sports. Same thing with East Asians, right? Chinese, Japanese, Asians, with mathematical models, 3D manipulation, engineering, and stuff like that. So if you have particular skill sets that aren't, and the whites are really good at creativity and all that kind of stuff, it's decent intelligence, high testosterone, and all that kind of stuff seems to be what helps propel the Western societies, and the individualism, which is both our blessing and our curse at the same time. So the reason I'm saying all of this is that when cultures become aware of each other, which which we're not really designed to do. Like, we're designed to kind of live cheek by jowl with other tribes. Maybe a little bit of trade here and there. There will be a few people who might float back and forth between these tribes. But basically, it's kind of an uneasy peace between tribes throughout most of our evolution. And when things got rough, well, things got rough. I mean, people would they'd have war. And so we're not designed to blend in with other cultures. This sort of giant modern experiment that's been going on for the last 50 years of trying to get, races, ethnicities, cultures, religions, and so on to just all jam into the same geographical area, try and manage them under the same laws for a significant period of time and not have it break down into basically a cultural warfare. Like, religious warfare is when the government controls religion, then every group tries to grab control of the government to impose its view of religion on every other group. But the culture wars it occurs the same way, except when government controls culture, which it does through government schools, which it does through subsidizing the arts, which it does through academia. When government controls culture, every group wants to gain control of the government so that it can impose its culture on other people. And the Marxists and the relativists and the leftists have been very successful at that over the past 60 or 70 years. So when we run into other cultures, generally what would happen historically is we either do this sort of uneasy side-by-side, live cheek by jowl with each other, maybe a little bit of blending, and this sort of happened with the Germanic tribes and the Romans in the late Roman Empire, or one conquers the other, like Genghis Khan style. But there's not this sort of let's hang out and stare at each other from across this divide of biology and IQ and culture and religion and history, genetics and so on, right? And so when you have lower IQ populations, forget about the genetics and the environment. Let's just say that this is what it is. If you have lower IQ populations and nobody talks about IQ, the bell curve, nobody talks about it, you create this giant void of incomprehension and resentment and frustration and hostility. And what happens is people in Venezuela look at America in particular, or Europe, and they say basically, those white devil gringo bastards. Because they don't understand the IQ gap. Nobody talks about it, and Marxists have to suppress it, right? Because they want to create this fantasy that everything's environmental, and if IQ is genetic, then, or has genetic components, they can't sustain that fantasy. So they look at America, they look at Europe, and they're incredibly frustrated, and they're incredibly angry. Incredibly angry. And I mean, I've seen these messages. We've had these messages. I've had these messages over the years. Blacks looking at presentation, angry. You white devils, you've stolen everything from it. And I understand it. I understand it. I'm not saying I sympathize with it, but I understand where it comes from. They're only rich because we're poor. They stole from us. And that's why we can't compete. That money was made from my daddy's blood. And yes, there has been predation, and there has been no question, but the West did not get rich through predation, because predation has been occurring all throughout human history. And only really since the 18th century in the West has productivity gone up 70 times, has the workday halved, and has lifespan doubled. And I mean, it's not stealing. And so there's this giant market of, we're going to explain to you why your culture is poor, why your economy is poor, why your people are poor. We're going to explain it to you, but we're not going to reference anything to do with IQ. We're not going to reference anything to do with the bell curve. We're not going to reference anything to do with anything. We're going to pretend everyone's exactly the same. Everyone's directly and completely and totally equal. And therefore, the only reason you're not doing badly is because of environmental problems and because of predation, largely from white people. I mean, that's the general story that's sold to people around the world who can't seem to get into the saddle of Western style, or even now India style, or China style, or Japan style, or South Korean style, or Vietnamese or Cambodian style wealth accumulation, right? So in other words, wherever there aren't whites and East Asians and Jews, there's big problems. So people will come and say, well, it's because of your environment, because you don't have the food and you don't have the medicine and blah, 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 right? And so what happens is then people say, well, if we give you stuff, you're going to become wealthy, just like Europe. Just like, even though that Europe did not become wealthy because space aliens came and gave them stuff. But this is the story that is given around the world, right? And the story is that if we give you money, then we're going to solve these environmental problems and you'll end up being just smart, just like East Asians, just like Jews, just like whites. And so trillions of dollars are poured into the third world in an attempt to ameliorate the problems of environmental deficiencies, maybe producing lower IQs and so on, or dysfunctional societies. And what happens? Well, we know what happens. People have a lot more kids, right? Yay! It's this Malthusian problem, right? That food production goes up in a linear fashion, but human production or production of humans goes up in an exponential fashion, and it crosses over and so on, right? So pouring trillions of dollars into the third world, all it's done is made lots more people in the third world, which is a huge problem because it's incredibly cruel, right? Because when that money runs out, as it will eventually, I mean, can't keep printing and creating money and borrowing money forever. When that money runs out, the cruelty that's going to be visited upon people in the third world is going to stagger our imagination. It's going to stagger our conception of the kind of evil that we have done in this supposed help, which is all about virtue signaling and making ourselves feel good in the moment and denying the basic fact of human biodiversity. I have incredible feelings of kindness and benevolence and generosity towards people in the third world, which is exactly why we should never have been pursuing the policies that we're pursuing, which is going to cause untold amounts of suffering relatively soon, I'm guaranteed. So that's the one answer. The other answer is that the whites, the East Asians, the Jews, they all stole from you, right? So when you pour trillions of dollars in the third world doesn't really get better. In fact, in some ways, it gets worse. Then the backup explanation is, you were robbed, you were stolen from, and they're still exploiting you, and they're still right. And this creates a resentment towards the free market. And it's easy to sell to lower IQ groups the idea that smarter people are just exploiting them, otherwise they'd be exactly the same, because there's a vanity puncturing. This is one of the great dangers of vanity puncturing. I mean, imagine, we think we're so great as a species, but imagine some space aliens come down and they're like, oh my God, you guys still have governments? How savage. You guys still lock people up? You guys still hit your children? I mean, you're like apes. You're like, oh, this is horrifying and horrible. What a vanity blow it would be for us as a species. And people take this stuff very, very, very personally. I mean, look at the way Jorge Ramos talks about Latinos and Hispanics and how much he loves La Raza. I mean, they're very, very proud. As a black guy I was listening to online the other day was saying, he's got an IQ of 141 and was talking about his growing understanding of race realism. And he was saying, black people take being black very seriously, right? And it's hard when the group that you're in, whether it's the human race with morally advanced space aliens, I am from the future, or some other, it's hard on the vanity. It causes a collapse in ego structure, which is tough enough to deal with when you're an adult, right? Well, it's very tough when you're younger. When I was younger and I ran crashing into my limitations, it's tough. It's hard. So this is very fertile ground for people to come in and say, develop things like socialism, because people look at the free markets of the West relative to South America, relative to Africa and other places. People look at the free markets of the West and they say, well, that's a lot of wealth. Now, can they create and sustain a free market environment? Well, a free market environment requires significant intelligence to understand, right? That the value of predation is pretty obvious and pretty immediate. The value of establishing property rights and establishing contracts and establishing an economy free from government interference. I mean, this is all very high concept. You got to look over the horizon. You got to defer gratification. This is all higher intelligence stuff. And I don't say this like the West is so smart that we're hanging on to it. I mean, we're handing it out piecemeal as it stands. And so when people come along and say, well, the free market exploits you, You're poor because you're exploited, not you're poor because at the moment you have an average IQ of 84 in the country. So you're poor. Sorry. It wasn't like the Japanese came over and stole your IQ with a straw, right? It's the way it is. It is the way it is. If the pygmies get really angry that they're not in the NBA, you can point out that pygmies tend to be, 4 or 5 feet tall, and that's not a great attribute for and being in the NBA and so on. But it's hard to tell people that. It's very disappointing. It's very challenging. And that is very fertile ground. Wherever we refuse to tell the truth, when a truth is necessary, like whenever we refuse to tell the truth and the truth is necessary, the truth is essential, all that happens is people come in and substitute something else for the truth. Like whenever we don't talk about the truth of human development, human biodiversity, and so on, what happens is other people come in and lie and create resentment and cause problems. And I think there's nothing to be scared of with human biodiversity. There's nothing to be scared of with the IQ stuff and so on. It just needs to be accepted, because if it's not accepted, you're going to create exactly the kinds of disasters that we see happening around the world in many countries at the moment. The disasters that are occurring in Venezuela and are only going to get worse from here. As we see a civilization that functioned relatively well before spiraling down into this medieval corruption and brutality. This is... So I think that there's a wide variety of combination of things. Sort of understanding the bell curve, understanding IQ doesn't solve everything, of course, right? But it is pretty necessary for us to understand there's a pretty key component of what's going on around the world. If we don't understand it, if we continue to reject it, the problems are still there. The disparities and the divergences are still there. It doesn't get rid of them if we refuse to talk about these issues. All that happens is our refusal to discuss basic facts that have been recognized for 100 years and that are recognized by all erudite professionals in the field, that the American Psychological Association has clearly recognized the bell curve issues. If we fail to discuss them, we just create a wide fertile ground for people to come in and lie about the causes of human inequality and lie about the causes of poverty. And that makes things far, far, far worse. If you care about the poor, we need to talk about this. So those are sort of my thoughts, and let me know what you think.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. You hit the nail on the head with everything.